Hi everybody, welcome to the latest in the series of ISE webinars. Today we're going to be talking all about apprenticeship. So we've got a really good panel. I've got Karen from Virgin Media, Danny from the Co-op, Simon from My Kind of Future, and James from BPP. The format of today's webinar is kind of a bit like a panel discussion that you'd probably get at a conference or at one of our special interest groups. Obviously, with so many of you on the webinar, it's really difficult to sort of take questions verbally. So can I ask you to use the question box? So as we go along, if there's a question you want to ask one of the panelists, pop it into the question box. I will see that, and then I will then moderate that question through to the panel. We do record these webinars, and then once the webinar is over, you'll get an email from us with a recording of the webinar. So if you want to go back and revisit some of the stuff that we talked about, or if you want to share that webinar, please do. During this crisis, we're opening all our webinars to everybody, not just members. So if any of you are dialing into this and you're not an ISE member, welcome to the club. I hope to see more of you. Also, a quick plug for our YouTube channel. So if you want to see our full suite of webinars, you can go onto our website or onto our YouTube channel and go back over a full history of all the stuff that we put online. So anyway, that's enough from me. I suggest we get stuck into it. A reminder, please bring your questions through, stick them up on the question box, and we'll ask them to your panelists. So what we're going to do to kick it off, rather than just doing a quick introduction, got a couple of questions to get the conversation going, and as we answer those questions, the panelists will introduce themselves. So can I go to you first, Karen? How are you sort of recruiting or planning to recruit at the moment? What's your strategy as the coronavirus crisis has deepened?
Hi everybody. Yeah, so we are continuing to fully hire against our forecast. So every year we bring in about 140 to 250 apprentices a year. So yeah, we're still going full steam ahead with all our apprenticeships. We've got 14 different apprenticeship standards that we're working towards. I think for us, part of our strategy has been that actually we probably have lent ourselves rather well to going online, from the fact that some of our process, I guess, is already virtually in terms of some of our screening, selection, situational judgment tests. So what we've done is just made sure that working through all the technology, all the different kind of processes to bring everything together. But yeah, still going ahead, gathering forecasts at the moment, which you might come on to later, around 2021. So we're still planning to recruit all of this year's apprentices, as well as to look to bring in over 200 in 2021.
So you've got one of those positive stories to tell. You're one of the employers that are still very active in the market, still recruiting.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, definitely no change. I think definitely being part of the telecom sector is a great place to be at the moment. I think one of the things we just sort of obviously wanted to make sure is that you know, our entry level talent is at the heart of our talent strategy, and that hasn't changed with COVID. So the view has been, you know, to keep on recruiting because we need those roles. Our strategy around our business needs in terms of some of those STEM skills, for example, hasn't changed. So there's definitely a view around that. I guess where we just have to really think about it is, can we deliver it in the same way? How do we ensure we keep that same high candidate experience? How do we make sure that we try and keep that process as human as possible, and say make it as, I guess, as easy for those apprentices as possible, because it's obviously a very difficult time for them applying and being probably a bit anxious in the, you know, so we're kind of getting roles. So we're obviously trying to find ways to make it as reassuring for those candidates as possible.
Karen, when do your apprentices tend to come in? What time, what month in the year? And because we've had a few clients worried about being able to onboard people when they can't get into an office. The idea of people starting remotely might be okay for an experienced person, but someone that's starting the first job, is that yes? How are you going to deal with that?
Yes, at the moment our plan is to still start everybody in September. So we're obviously we're bringing in interns and graduates as well. So we're kind of working through everything together. They've just got different start dates. So our plan, as I said, is to continue bringing them in all at the same day. We're just working through how we virtualise the induction process. I think it could come down to just making sure, I guess, locally from that line manager point of view, are they going to be able to manage them? But from a, I guess, a central point of view, we're running on track, but just making sure we, you know, work with all those line managers to make sure that those roles can start. The viewers at the moment, they can. We've got BAU roles that are starting during COVID. So our view is that unless there's any reason they can't, because of the nature of those roles, perhaps if they're more physical in our field technician space, it's a bit harder than perhaps some of the virtual inductions. But yeah, at the moment the view is that they will start the end of September.
Wow. So, and what's your timeline for recruitment then? When do you start and when do your offers go out?
So yes, we've been live since early March. We've just gone live a couple of days ago for some more roles. We've got about 6 or 7 more roles, all types of roles up to grab. So the view is that we'll be recruiting through to about July. So we're kind of staggering the process because we're still recruiting for graduates in the Netherlands and the Poland and the UK. We're just trying to manage it all, manage it all together. But yeah, that process is ongoing. So we're obviously managing candidate expectations by ensuring that, if there was any change or potential change, we would let them know. So I guess part of our strategy has been to build more coaching calls in, so to really ensure they understand what they're going through, what the changes are, the elements that might need to adapt as we go through. For example, you might not be able to come to an office on your first day, but again, I think to the earlier point that it's still quite a few months till September. Anything could change. So we're kind of preparing for the worst, but hoping by end of September things may have changed and people may be able to go back into the office in some respects.
And Danny, what's the situation with you? You look like you're dialing in from the Coronation Street set, I believe.
Not quite the set. It's our Coronation Street meeting room. So similar to Karen, actually, on a headline, we're still continuing to recruit. We're still continuing to bring new colleagues into our business across the board, and that includes early talent. It's likely that apprenticeship numbers will be recruited at the same level as planned, but we face a slightly different position than a lot of companies in the sense of we've just recruited about 5,000 new colleagues in the space of 2 weeks, which is about 50% of what we would usually recruit in a year. And what we've actually identified in a period of time is some really great talent within that talent pool. So we're looking at how can we still recruit externally and make sure that we're offering our apprenticeship vacancies across the board, not just necessarily to young people, but to everyone from a community perspective, but also you can mobilize that 5,000 strong talent pool, which includes opera singers, pilots, you name it, we've probably got it. And how do we convert some of those into apprenticeships? And I think that that kind of agility and flexibility is an approach that we're going to have to take for the rest of the year. It's likely that we'll still be recruiting until the end of July. So again, similar to Karen, and we're being really focused in terms of target audiences and schools and colleges that we're focusing on to really build a quality pipeline into those vacancies and spending time and effort on that. We're also starting to look at plans for 2021. Brexit will naturally have an impact on a lot of organisations, and one thing I'm really keen to make sure that we don't lose sight of is exactly the problems which Brexit will bring up, particularly for a retailer. It feels like kind of Brexit has been the I suppose the quiet one really on the back burner as such recently, but really keen to make sure that particularly within our logistics business and particularly within our retail stores, we're continuing to keep that in sight. So headline, we're still recruiting for 2020. Summer intakes have been pushed back to Q3, but we will still recruit for Q3. We are also working quite quickly and quite hard to look at how can we secure work experience opportunities for the co-op academies that we have across the UK, and setting up a placement program to feed a pipeline for apprenticeships. So we still are kind of looking at that whole pipeline, but again, it's a week by week, it's a month by month process of making decisions and planning where needed and reacting where needed as well.
Thanks, Danny. And Simon, how are your clients responding to the crisis in the work that you do?
Yeah, and great to start with some good news stories from Karen and Darren. But unfortunately, we are seeing the real live examples of the evidence of the latest piece of research that obviously Stephen, you and your team published around, graduate numbers down 12%, apprentices down 32%, placements and interns, whatever it is, 40%. So we're definitely seeing that. Unfortunately, that is a reality, but it's not just Karen and Danny who are recruiting. I was literally talking to a company just today. They're keeping their numbers for their grads and their apprentices for this summer intake, no change. So it's definitely not all doom and gloom. And I think that's a really important message. We need to get that balance right in terms of a messaging point of view, both to businesses, particularly at the senior end, when they're hearing, oh, everyone's cutting it, so fine, we can cut it as well. I think we've got to get that balance right. And also for, bless them all, the year 13s coming out of school, all the finalists coming out of university, this is a really tough time for them. Because again, all they'll be hearing is what the British press do brilliantly, which is depress the hell out of you from a news point of view. So they're going to be really disheartened. And I think it's important that, yeah, listen, it's tough and there are realities out there, but firms are still hiring, and we just need to get that balance right. And I think we have a collective responsibility as the ISE, but also, as employers and organisations like myself and James, who support and work with employers, to get that balanced message out there. I'll talk about it a bit more when we talk about engaging with schools, but I think that's a super important message that we just need to get the balance right. I don't know what you think, James.
Well, I was just going to ask Sam, are you saying that it's sector specific? Because the type of clients we work with is typically professional services, financial services, but they don't seem to be impacted. The numbers, as Karen and Danny suggesting, seem to be similar. Like we take on, I don't know what it is, 3,000 apprentices in September, and we expect that number to be similar. The big clients that we work with are saying the same things. They're still, but that's the sectors of professional services.
Yeah,
financial services don't seem to be affected.
No, you're right, James. And again, if you dig a bit into the latest ISE research, it shows by sector, and you won't be surprised by the sectors that are most hard hit and are impacting that. So definitely there is an element of sector to it. And again, that's another really important part of the messaging, James. We need to be communicating that, where opportunities do exist and what sectors do have those, opportunities. So you're right, James, it's sector specific. There are trends within sectors, let's put it like that, rather than hard and fast, but there are definitely, unsurprisingly, airline industry, shocking. I mean, bless them, really, really, news from EasyJet today, really, really hard. But
the share prices went up yesterday, didn't they? Because I think all of a sudden there's a bit more confidence around holidays, and we're starting to think about, hey, we could go on holiday this summer now. So I think all of a sudden people are starting to feel a little bit more confidence around I think it's the sectors where there's more uncertainty about what's it going to look like post-COVID. They're the ones that they just don't know yet, do they? Whereas the other sectors, perhaps it's a little bit more not certain, but you've got a bit more certainty of what your business is going to look like because you've been able to operate with home working. Your income hasn't really been impacted as much.
Yeah, it's there's grading in every sector, right, in terms of how you look at it. But and I think that's the point. I think that reinforces the point, James. Really, is you've got to look beneath the headlines in terms of how it really is. And I think that's I think that's such an important message that we all have a collective responsibility to do. Because the last thing we want is for talent to think there are no jobs and not apply. And because that will be equally painful for us, particularly from a diversity standpoint. Particularly those young people from less advantaged backgrounds. You think about the social mobility agenda. If they think there's no jobs or less jobs, there's a risk they're going to think, well, there's even less chance for me. I won't even bother to apply because I've got no chance at all. And then suddenly all this great work that so many organizations full stop have done around improving the diversity of the people coming into their organization is going to go backwards. So we've got to get that message right, that it's tough and it's hard, but there are firms out there that are still recruiting the same numbers or maybe just less numbers. but it's a really important message. Sorry, Stephen, I went on a bit there, but
I was just going to say, with history that we've seen of when we've had financial crises before and bubbles bursting, that's impacted on employers reducing the graduate intakes by 50%, that they've found it very difficult, 2-3 years down the line, when they need that talent to be coming through, it's not there. So that's definitely what we've seen in professional services, a number of years ago, where graduate recruitment was cut drastically, and they've really, really struggled coming out the other end. So I think they've learned from that.
The only upside of regular recessions is that people remember the mistakes they made last time, in terms of potentially cutting too hard, and then the impact of that further down the line. Probably not a story for today, but I've got a hilarious story of Stephen about 15 to 20 years ago at an ISE conference talking about the impacts of recession on hiring, but maybe we'll save that for another day. Sorry, Stephen, back to you.
No, that's fine. So James, with your clients, are you saying that they're very much the recruiting patterns are what you would typically expect? There isn't too much being trimmed. Is that because it's, in a sense, I'm not going to say easier, but actually if you've got formal training in place, actually if I go back to my old life at EY, I think, right, I've got an intake coming in, actually the first chunk of their time they're going to go into training, so I can just stick them in front of a laptop and they can deliver that training.
Completely. I think
part of the patterns you're seeing?
It is, yeah. I think because the companies we work with have got such a machine of how they take on 300, 400, how they induct them centrally, and it's the training as well. Because the training can be done in block release and virtually, they can front load the training if they want to, and that's been happening pre-COVID anyway. So I think you're definitely right. And I think what we have seen, though, there's one sector in particular, the legal sector, they're just delaying it. So rather than the students starting in September, they're going to start in January, February. We've got a couple of financial service clients that are doing a similar thing. So the numbers are the same, but they might just be delaying it. Whereas the bigger employers who do take on hundreds and hundreds of graduates every year, it's business as usual.
I do also wonder, related to that point, Stephen, about the apprentice numbers. Again, looking at the latest research from you guys, 12% less grads, but 32% less apprentices. I do wonder whether part of that is a knee-jerk reaction to thinking, how can I bring new apprentices on, with all the training they're going to need? How can I make that work? It just feels too complicated. Let's cut there. And and Karen and Danny, you guys live in that world, but I just wonder whether it's kind of an easy one to go, let's not, very, very short term, because they think, well, it'll be too complicated to deliver apprenticeships, because they need, depending on the level of apprenticeship and what kind of apprenticeship it is, it'll just be too complicated. Let's not. I've got no evidence to back that up. It's just a feel that I have to try and understand that big difference between apprentices and grads.
Yeah.
I don't know what you think, Karen, Danny, but
I think for us, there hasn't really been a debate, to be honest, around whether we bring those apprentices in. I think it was probably down to our team potentially, I guess, from our perspective, if there was any, risk to flag, and we might put a massive COVID plan together after I managed to get my 2-week holiday in just beforehand. But I was a bit lucky there. So put like a massive plan together, and I guess at that stage, thought about literally, I'll be trying to think of everything. And at that stage, yes, it has been hard. I'm not going to lie. There's been a lot of work trying to, I was just saying before we joined this call, we ran our first virtual assessment centre yesterday, and it went really well, luckily. And hours and hours have been spent looking at what technology we can use. How do we run the sessions? Can we have the same assessors? How can you map all those same exercises? Do we need to change any? You can't underestimate the amount of work. And then on the other side, you've then got all the on-programme pieces, like, we run summer events and, inductions, and like you say, working with all those managers to make sure that not only from a central point of view, but locally they'll be able to, they're doing a great experience up front, but then they go into those line managers and it falls over. So it is a lot of work, but I guess from our point of view, because we still need those roles, and our view is we can do it. It's just probably taking a lot more resource, a lot more energy up front. It's not planned into what we'd have done this year. So all of a sudden we're having to flex what we do. But it is doable. Well, it's doable for us. But yeah, it is. I imagine that could be some of the some of the reasons, especially if some teams have been potentially furloughed. You know, I've still got my same size team, so I have to just juggle resource. If people have been furloughed to a reduction, you know, in their week or together, that might have an impact if their resources being challenged. What about you, Danny?
Yeah, a bit of a mixed bag really. So across the portfolio, where we've got apprentices going into teams or business areas which are, you know, they've been in kind of in the office, they've been, you know, almost a little bit of business as usual minus the social distancing element of working. Those teams are, you know, really confident. Yep, let's get them in, stick to the numbers, no changes there. Where we've seen the flip side of that is actually in teams where we're bringing in apprentices for the first time, and there's almost a little bit of hesitation, maybe a lack of confidence there around I don't know how to. Maybe there's I don't know how to do it, or I'm not confident about that experience, and I think it would be a fair statement to say that some employers probably would be nervous around that kind of inducting someone in, especially if it's their first career as such. So it's a really mixed bag for us, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah. Cool.
I think one of the we've heard some of that as well, and I think what we've also heard from employers is, and it's quite a practical thing, this is that when this crisis struck, actually there are some employers that do their apprentice recruitment a bit later in the cycle. They do the graduate first and then come to their apprentices. But there's always been sort of arguments raised about when's the right time to do it. Is actually, I think some employers just went, right, we're not recruiting anymore. We're not going to take any offers away, but stopping. Actually, it was the apprentices that got hit the hardest because they were still some of the bigger numbers that were left to hire in some sectors. And, you know, Danny, when we do our retail town halls, you know, the non-food retail sector has been really badly hit. I mean, there's most of those guys that are being put pretty much exclusively on furlough. So again, it plays back to that. It's really different sector by sector. I'm just looking at some of the questions coming through. So we started to talk a little bit around candidate experience. So I've got a question here from Amy, and it talks. Amy says, "How do you ensure you get a positive candidate experience when conducting virtual assessment centres for apprentices?" Who wants to do that, Danny or Karen? I guess that's one for you two.
It's fresh in Karen's mind. From yesterday.
I haven't got the results yet, but I could talk about how I think it'll go. So I guess one of the things we pride ourselves on, we kind of you know, we've been tracking last year. We were tracking at plus 67 in candidate MPS. If you think of a scale minus 100 to plus 100, so it's really important to us, and we've always delivered highly. So I guess our view is that, you know, we want to continue to do well in candidate experience. So we did build in more coaching calls. So we work with Amberjack, who's our recruitment supplier. So we just built in more coaching calls before they started, so that they are really clear up front what that day is going to be. So, you know, making sure that they've got the right technology. So not everyone might have a laptop or a PC. So how do we manage that? Checking all those kind of pieces, I guess, from a practicality of being able to come to that assessment centre and ensuring we can be as accessible as we can be. It's making sure that they understand how the day will run, because for some apprentices, they may never have even done an assessment centre anyway. So they might already be more nervous than a graduate who's perhaps been to, you know, 19 other assessment centres and perhaps just think a little bit different. So we've walked them through kind of all those stages, explained how the day will run basically. You know, instead, obviously, these are, you know, the first time to running this. I think there's a little bit of an expectation that, you know, you'd like to hope they would be understanding, because this isn't, you know, usual for employers to do. We've all had to build things very quickly. Again, to your point earlier, Stephen, we've had a little bit more time to plan because we were still just going live in March. So whereas other organisations, perhaps more with their graduate model, were having to quickly put things in within a week, 2 weeks, you know, we've had a couple of months to kind of really think it through and get that right solution, I guess. You know, learn from others as well. So to me, it's all about keep communicating with those candidates. The more you can tell them, just to be really honest and say, you know, there might be a couple of glitches, we might have a few technical issues at the start of that assessment centre. Please don't worry, we'll sort, you know, this is how it will shape up. So I thought we only ran our first one yesterday. We've got another one tomorrow, and we've got about probably, God knows how many more, about another 50 potentially during 2020. But, you know, the feedback verbally was very positive, so it'll be interesting to see when we complete the apprentice campaign how that candidate MPS stacks up, and does it match? Have we had any changes at that assessment centre stage, because we track MTS at every stage of the process. So it'll be interesting to see whether they felt that experience was a little bit different. But where we can keep it as human as possible, like we would do at the assessment centre, we would do a lot of chatting to those candidates in between exercises. You just lose a little bit of that because of the nature of the technology.
Yeah, I had a question from Ian as well, actually. So just before, Ian's saying does actually, and it doesn't sound like it does, that the moving online isn't impacting volumes, i.e. because you've got to do it in this way, it doesn't mean that you can see less candidates. I'm kind of thinking you might be able to see more candidates actually through a typical day of assessment online.
You've probably got to run more assessment centres. We're probably finding that we're running smaller numbers. So we used to run up to like 18 candidates in a day. I think that's too many now. We've got 12 tomorrow. So yesterday we had 4. So our first one was a smaller one because we were just hiring one data scientist apprentice yesterday, whereas tomorrow we're recruiting more numbers, so it's a bigger one. What we have found is that where a group exercise would typically have 6 candidates, for example, in it, because of the technology we've now and the way it will work to make it better, is we've reduced it to 4. So it is meaning that where we would have big numbers to recruit, we can't really bring through as many candidates as we would. So you can keep the same volumes, but you potentially have to run more days. So from a central team point of view, we'll have some impact on our resource. So we would say we've got about 14 different apprenticeship standards we're running. So some of those would have been separate assessment centres anyway, as opposed to one big assessment centre for lots of roles.
To address that challenge, actually, because I was talking to an organisation yesterday, Karen, around virtual assessment centres and not being able to run as bigger ones because it's virtual, because of the tech challenges and so on. And so one of the things that they're and we're exploring with them is, though this is not ideal from a candidate experience point of view, is adding in an additional stage ahead of the assessment centre, just to try and get so they don't have to run as many assessment centres, because they're going to have to run more because it's virtual rather than less. So I think there's lots of different ways that you can look at it in terms of, and lots of different companies, unsurprisingly, are looking at it in different ways. But certainly the trend I'm seeing and we're seeing is you can't, from a candidate experience point of view, and actually for an ability to assess fairly and confidently, they're probably, if you're used to running bigger ones, you might need to get reused to running smaller ones, would be what we're seeing.
Yeah, agree.
And Karen, would you say the introverts have got a better chance with the being online? That if they're going into a face-to-face assessment centre, they might feel intimidated for the first time, whereas they might be a bit more confident. I mean, I'm just playing it back to the experience we have with online teaching, that students that are more likely to ask questions in an online environment than they are face-to-face, because they don't feel as nervous or as embarrassed about being shown up in front of people.
I mean, we've only run once, it's probably quite difficult to answer that, but I think that's a really interesting concept, James, to be honest, because I think that sometimes is the challenge with assessment centres, especially when you've got different types of schemes that may attract different types of candidates, like a sales scheme versus an engineering scheme, just as an example. And how do you make sure that everyone has a voice, in the room, and how you kind of assessing that criteria? So that was definitely be interesting to reflect on. I think it's probably a bit difficult for me to say whether that was just running 4 candidates yesterday, whether I'm seeing that, but I'll definitely look into that with our team, but for sure, I think that's a really good insight for us to look at.
Yeah.
Danny, I cut you off. You were going to start talking about your experiences.
I just think, to echo everything that Karen said there around, investing time into the candidate, potentially a little bit more than you might be used to. We're running prepinars every week before assessment centres, where we're catching up with students on a one-to-one basis, and where we can, we are developing on-demand content as well. So whether students are coming to us for an interview or somewhere else, we're looking to provide content to students to just help understand. It's less about the content of assessment and what it is exactly that you're looking for. It's more, actually, I've never been to an assessment centre as Karen reference, but I've never maybe even done a Zoom call or a Google Meet or whatever you want to use. It's just trying to kind of overcome some of that nervousness really around technology, and actually prepare as you would for a normal interview, because that will go a long way. And just really simple advice to candidates. But it isn't an easy thing to try and manage in terms of workload, particularly when one of the things that we're seeing is the areas where we are recruiting into are absolutely stacked because of colleagues self-isolating, therefore increasing workload on other colleagues as well. So getting that balance, I think, between investment in candidate experience and hiring manager time is something that we're probably treading the line on at the moment, but is a fine balance for certain. Interestingly, we saw a drop of candidates at assessment wanting to come to assessment centres. We'd invited 30 candidates for 10 roles to our legal business, an assessment centre, literally on the day that lockdown went in place, which was pretty frustrating. We got all that way and it got pulled at last minute. Right thing to do, of course. We kept those candidates warm and then went back to them and just checked in with them. We did see quite a significant drop, actually. 10 students saying that they're no longer interested in the programme. And when we delved into that, it was almost that, well, they've decided to go to university and take up options at university that they already had on the table. And then I'm hearing that actually both from students and from careers leaders that stability or that security of an unconditional offer potentially of a university whenever that academic year starts is something which some of our students have preferred to go towards rather than putting themselves through an application process and keeping their options open, which is an interesting move, to be honest.
You think it'd be the opposite, wouldn't you? You think that they'll be deferring university and rather than starting work. That's what I was assuming is going to happen.
Interesting.
Just a question from Jill, Simon. You mentioned the additional assessment step that you might put in place. Any thoughts on actually what that might look like, what it might be?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think it depends on what you've got in place already. So certainly this organisation we're working with, one of the reasons that we felt that could be an option is they didn't have many steps before the assessment day, so it wasn't making it too long from a candidate experience point of view. But one of the specific areas we were looking at is, and this was around more practical apprenticeships, was around some way of assessing aptitude ahead of it. Ahead of the assessment day, because that was one of the bits of the concerns from the hiring managers, is on a physical assessment centre we can actually see them in action and we can test their aptitude and capability around some of the kinds of capabilities that we're going to need from them in a very, very practical way that I can see in front of me. And how do we do that, if we're doing a virtual assessment centre? So we were looking at exploring an activity that we could do that would address that in the run-up. So I think it's very specific. It will depend on how many other stages you've got already, whether that's even an option. If there's been 4 stages before the assessment centre, adding another one in would be probably not great. But because they only had a couple, the ability to put one more in didn't feel like it would negatively impact the candidate experience, and actually allow us to essentially pull through people who are more likely to be successful on the assessment centre, as well as run smaller numbers.
Got it. I want to go on to training in a minute or two and just probably bring you in there, James. But just before we do that, because we were going to talk about this, and also a couple of questions have come up, and that's around actually the attraction piece. And obviously, with all the conversation around, when are schools and colleges going back, how are they going to go back? How do we keep that dialogue actually open with both schools and colleges, and also with the students themselves? Because one of the things that we did ask in our survey was employers' views on this. They very much said they want to keep that dialogue going. So I just wondered, all that uncertainty, and Simon and Danny, we were going to talk to you about this, was what do you think about actually how employers could or should be keeping up that dialogue with that students and college population?
I think in terms of what we're currently doing, it's about leveraging that relationship that you've already got potentially with schools. And if you don't have relationships with schools and college, you still can build them with the right people in the institutions as such. But what I would say is engaging in or getting in front of students is a challenge, and therefore I think focusing your efforts in the quality rather than the quantity of schools that you're engaging with. I think it's a really good opportunity, and one thing that we're working through at the moment is how can we use this current climate and this current crisis as such, be that for this academic year or be that for the following academic year, to look to weave in more content into the curriculum now that it's arguably a bit more accessible for employers because it's online and Google Classroom, etc., etc. I reference kind of things that we're doing around on-demand skills building, so things like career snapshots, 15 minutes videos of the guy who created the compostable carrier bag and his kind of career story, and really different sectors and industries that students can go in. You know, creating that content and feeding it out to schools and colleges is something that we're really looking at. And I think the other piece for me is when leveraging that relationship or building that relationship is thinking about how are you going to effectively support that student, be that an apprentice or potentially even a graduate, when engaging with the universities, to integrate into not just an employer but actually structure. You know, if they're year 11s or year 13s, they've had no real structure since the 17th of March. And a big concern of mine is, in what state, in what position will a student come to us as an employer in Q3 this year, or whenever that might be for an employer. So I think working with schools and colleges remotely via Zoom, via Google Classroom is a way to get in front of the students and creating content for colleges to use or schools to use, but also having that really open dialogue with them about how you work together to integrate that student back into a structure and therefore back onto an apprenticeship as such. I think the one thing I would say about creating content, and for those who are potentially linked into the Careers Leaders UK Facebook group, if you're not, it's a really good platform. There is so much content out there at the moment being created by many different parties, training providers, learning providers, employers, that really are having a deep conversation with the school and college to create something which is beneficial to them specifically, or almost in your own niche. I think will really give value to that content, rather than just creating, for example, how do you write a great CV? There are probably 10,000 webinars, sessions, videos on how to write a great CV, all probably telling you different things as well. So I think investing in that quality is really key.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point, Danny, is that, with everyone pivoting to digital, boy, is digital going to become noisy in terms of events. And if you offer CV online workshop, the whole world will be offering those. So you need to be creative, you need to be different. And where you can, with the way you talk about the schools you work with, Danny, is what we describe as partner schools, where you've got a really in-depth, and it takes time to build up to that, but really then investing in those schools. I think just a couple of other points, because all those are really bang on the money, and I can't add any more to that, Danny. I think one, don't stop communicating with schools. I think it's so important you keep them informed about what's going on. Again, they're normal people, teachers. They're going to hear what's in the media about less jobs, less apprenticeship, all this kind of stuff. So it's so important that you keep the comms going with them about what you are doing, and that there are opportunities out there. Back to that earlier point I made, there are opportunities still out there. It's not like there's nothing. So I think keep talking to the schools is really important. Tell them what's going on. Radio silence is the worst. So even if it's not good news, tell them and keep them informed. I think that's really important, because and why that's also important is that aligns part of Gatsby benchmarks, which is about understanding the local labour market. So let them know what's going on. It will strengthen your relationship with that school, with that college, that you're giving them that information, which actually then supports them deliver against Gatsby. And certainly our experience has been, and it comes back to the point you made, Danny, around there are schools their entire world is face-to-face delivery, and suddenly they've been asked to do everything virtually. They don't have anything like the resources universities have. You know, they are really trying so hard and to change at such pace. Plus, think about safety and when they do start break, they've got so much stuff going on. So if you can provide them with, to Danny's point, really good quality content, we know from our own experience, schools love it. And they will use it really practically with their students and weave it into what they are doing from a curriculum standpoint. And that can be, content can come in all kinds of different forms. So, what could be insights, and, those video is obviously great. So Danny, as you talked about, short, sharp videos are great. But also, competitions and challenges, stuff for them they can actually get stuck into and deliver an end result on is really great. And I think the other piece is using tech, and we talk about this a lot, using technology as a force for good. So using it as an opportunity to connect students who are interested with existing apprentices within your organization through technology. Is that ability for them to have a personal relationship with someone through technology, so you can safeguard it, is really powerful. Because we've always got to remember with school and college engagement, and I'm sure you'll all be well versed with this, you're taking them on a journey. It's not like you do a workshop with them and suddenly they all apply. They'll have more questions, they'll want to think about it. So it's really about thinking about it in a much more joined up way in terms of the interactions that you have, so you can take them on that journey, allow them to continue learning, finding out about your industry, your company, the kinds of roles you've got, what is an apprenticeship, help take them on that journey, I think is another really important part of anyone's thinking when it comes to brutally getting ROI from whatever you're doing with schools and colleges. Some of the thinking that you might need to apply.
I'm just conscious of time, sorry, and I want to get onto the sort of the training side of things. What happens when people do join the business? James, with all the sort of conversations around furlough, doing remote inductions, etc., what changes are you seeing in how apprentice training is being delivered?
I mean, it does depend on sector by sector. I mean, there's some apprenticeships where the training obviously is hands-on training. You have to be there with the person. So the type of programs that we deliver, which are much more professional office-based occupations, it's pretty much been as per normal. I mean, as a training organisation, we deliver a lot of our training online anyway, so that's before the crisis. It's always been a blend of face-to-face and online. Obviously it's now moved to fully online, so for someone like us, it's probably been a bit easier than other providers where they've had assessors going out to the workplace. That's obviously had to move to online coaching. Face-to-face workshops have had to move to obviously online as well. So I think the training providers that are almost like the schools today, that they've had to go from 0 online training to 100% overnight. Everyone's innovating, everyone's learning very quickly. But I think, I mean, the big changes we've seen obviously is its impact on employment. So it's things like furlough. When current apprentices that you've got on program are furloughed, the government allowing people to still be trained, which I think has been a great move. And we were very, very nervous that a lot of our students would be furloughed but wouldn't have access to any learning, would be held back. But that's been a positive move. Again, for other apprentices, that their workload has actually increased. So we've had people working in certain sectors where there's less staff, or just demand has increased. So banking in particular, as you can imagine, if you work in a contact centre now, there was one bank I was speaking to that when the crisis hit, an average time to speak to someone in a contact centre was, I think it was 10 minutes. It went from 10 minutes to 8 hours because there was that many people trying to get through. So if you can imagine that apprentice then trying to find time off to do the study was incredibly difficult. So training providers have had to be flexible with how they deliver that learning over a period of time. So they've had to flex with their employers to say, well, rather than it taking 12 months, it's going to have to take 15 months. And what we'll do now is they can concentrate on the work, but we'll then front load the training later on. So I think that's what we've seen, where training providers have had to speak to their employers. They've had to rephase the learning. The government have been pretty flexible, I think, in allowing that to happen. The other big change we've seen is break-in learning. So for those of you that are familiar with these terms, break-in learning is someone stops the official programme, and it tends to be something, you know, quite serious. Something that you know, they have no alternatives, so they're on maternity leave or they're long-term sick. So it tends to be they have a pause and then they come back. So we've certainly seen that, but the handful of employers that have used that official break, they've actually restarted now. So we've started to see that, you know, it's almost, I'm not saying it's over because it clearly isn't over, but we're seeing like that initial panic of, oh my God, people are not going to be able to do this. 2 months down the line, it's actually, you know, we have been able to be a bit more flexible with how they do find the time. And so that break-in learning, I don't think we've got anyone, about 8,000 students, I don't think we've got anyone now that's using break-in learning. But I suppose if we look forward to September, to that big intake, it's going to have to be working with providers around, you know, that induction. So you're going to be doing your induction probably remotely. The induction of the training will have to be remote as well. So all the government paperwork. So a traditional approach for getting a student onto a program would be an assessor would go out to your workplace. They would be signing photocopied versions of all sorts, getting them to sign your health and safety certificate. That has to go now. You know, I would imagine employers allowing visitors into the office is going to become incredibly difficult. Even if the office is open, I'd imagine you're going to be limiting people coming in. So training providers are going to have to be flexible around how they get people to complete enrolments virtually, meeting the coaches virtually, delivering the seminars and so on virtually. So it's, you know, like we're doing here, training providers are going to have to be much more flexible with how they deliver.
Karen and Danny, any thoughts from an employer perspective on that training piece?
Yeah, I mean, a bit similar to James actually. I mean, we work with a lot of training providers, and BCP is one of them. We've probably got about 15 or 16 training providers because we offer such a range of apprenticeships, and they've all been fantastic actually. You know, moving online. I think we had a blended approach anyway to our end. So some of our apprenticeships would have been fully online. Some would have been a mix. So actually, we were already in a good place, I guess, in terms of people being used to that. I think for us it will be a benefit. I think from what the team have been saying, actually by moving skills coaches, you know, to online, they're obviously saving a lot of travelling, and actually they're finding that they can actually talk to more apprentices in a shorter period of time than whereas it might have taken, you know, several weeks to get round everybody. Now they're able to do it much quicker. So in some ways, I think it will benefit us. There's obviously that piece around the physical interaction versus virtual, but I think from, I guess, an administration and efficiency and some of those pieces around sign-ups on day one that you've mentioned, James, I think from an employer's point of view, that'll be great for us because it'll be easier for us to manage in terms of, you know, where people are travelling to. But if it is one thing, I would definitely, if you haven't started apprenticeships or you're looking at training providers, I don't know how different they are in terms of how quickly they're set up. Obviously, James is, you know, a great example of a training provider that's kind of, you know, naturally kind of moved more online, but it's definitely a good time to make sure that where they are having to do a lot more online, that we probably look at that because it does make a massive difference. It's really, you know, where we've had to do quite a lot on the recruitment side to make a difference from our team. Actually, the training providers have made it really easy for us to not have to worry about that side. They've kind of taken all that, you know, work from us, so to speak, and we're benefiting.
Yeah, because we were concerned about, you know, that question that came in about your assessment centres. What's the student experience going to be like? And we had the same thing. So although a lot of our apprenticeships are online, we still had thousands of teaching days that were face to face. Our law school, our nursing school, our account. So we had to move everything, obviously, online. And we did surveys out to all of our students after every single online lecture to find out how did that experience compare. And so every single day we analyse the results. We step in if a tutor looks like they're, you know, perhaps they've been scoring 4 out of 5 one day and it's down to 1 out of 5 the following day, and we can actually look at the recording. We can go back and see what happened, why didn't it work very well, give them immediate training. But we found that we had 8,000 responses since it went fully online. I think our average score is about 4.4 out of 5 for a tutor, which is typical what we get for face-to-face. So we're finding that the students are thinking that, I think they've just been grateful that they can continue to study for a start. I think they were really worried they were going to be behind, you're not going to be able to do their exams and so on. But I think so it's not just the training providers, that you've got to be careful around Yeah. Of that, I mean, Karen, you have so many different programs. Danny, you'll be the same as well. The assessments that happen, you know, sometimes you're relying on professional bodies. Are they set up now for online assessments? The endpoint assessor, are they ready for virtual? And I've been amazed at some of these professional bodies who would take, you know, 5 years to introduce something online, can do something overnight, and all of a sudden you've got this online. You don't have to go to a Pearson VUE test centre to do your exam anymore. You can go into your bedroom, and as long as they can look at a camera around your room and check you're not cheating, you know, you're allowed to do these professional exams now. So I think you just got to just make sure you factor both of those things in. It's not just the provider, you've got other organisations involved in the assessment too.
Yeah. I do think it'll make a difference actually, because I think where obviously there's different reasons why people don't do apprenticeships, you know, I guess one of those reasons around people thinking there's a lot of administration, bureaucracy around, you know, that apprenticeships around how things have got to be, and actually if they stay as they are, or, you know, have a blended approach in future, they don't go 100% back to what it was. I do think that for some organisations that will be quite a big step for people thinking more about doing apprenticeships from that model.
Definitely. I think there's something for me as well around if we can collectively face into the challenge around enabling individuals who are probably in more deprived areas and maybe don't have initial access to technology, the benefits which can be gained from moving things online, you know, the fact that candidates maybe aren't choosing apprenticeships now because of the need to travel, be that to an interview or actually be that for the program, I think can really benefit as well if we can get over that initial barrier of enabling.
That's such a good point, Danny. We've just started working with a training provider in the US, and of course their geography is so massive. Of course it's all virtual, you know, because the geography is just so partly it's a mindset, you know, and it comes back to the point I was making earlier about one of the potential reasons why maybe apprentice numbers were just, you know, so much lower, cut harder than grads this year. Is just this mindset that it can't be done. Well, you know, we've heard from all of you, of course it can. You know, and often, to your point, James, it takes 5 years to change it. It takes 5 minutes. You know, it can be, yes, it takes a lot of resource and time and effort, but the change can be made. So I do think there's a mindset piece that we need to shift with people, because then, as you said, Danny, then we can actually offer apprenticeships more broadly, more widely. We can increase our talent pool. We can, you know, improve the diversity of the people we're bringing in. All those benefits flow. I know we don't have time for it today because we need to wrap up, but it's also true we're seeing that with work experience being offered digitally now in schools and colleges. Suddenly you now can offer it to areas outside of your local community. You know, we're seeing our clients do more work experience now because it's digital, and target some of those cold spots and do that activity, not less, because they're not restricted by venue space and all that kind of stuff. So there's definitely a mindset piece. There's good that is going to come out of it. Not all good, I completely appreciate, and at a very personal level for a lot of people this is an incredibly hard time, but looking forward, you know, I think a lot of good, there's the opportunity for a lot of good to come out of it. Sorry, Stephen, I'll put on my bandwagon a bit.
I've just got one more sort of a couple of questions that have come from the listeners. Sound like we're on the radio. That I'll put, and then I think we'll just come for a quick sort of wrap up question to all of you. And I'm going to combine a couple of questions here, one from Keith and one from Anne-Marie. And there's a couple of things they're talking about, which is actually from a government perspective. So actually, does the government need to do more actually to support the whole apprentice piece around, because we have talked about some of that reduction in numbers, which is worrying, and you know, and also sort of stimulating degree apprentices and all that kind of stuff. And also, actually, are there any thoughts around how the levy might need to be used differently because of this crisis? Because it's really struck me that there's been no conversation that I've heard about the levy. You know, that tax has still been levied on employers. That's not been taken off. So I don't know. Has anyone got any thoughts around government intervention, use of the levy that we should be thinking about as a result of this crisis?
In the final 4 minutes, that's an easy topic, isn't it?
Well, there was one thing mentioned yesterday, wasn't there? Boris talked about this guarantee for apprentices at the committee meeting. I mean, there was no detail other than he'll go away and look at it. So, I mean, I've heard Justine Greening being interviewed, and she mentioned a couple of things. One was about levy flexibility, but she was aiming at it more your existing workforce who are worried about losing their jobs, or it could be people that, you know, I mean, Danny, you mentioned that point about a pilot working. We had a pilot delivering our shopping the other day, you know, so there could well be people who are going to need to be retrained, and it could be that they're actually not in the right job in their work, but they do want the training. You know, I think that's always the limitation of apprenticeship, is you have to be in the job to get the training. Well, actually, I need the training first to get the job. So it could be that that's what Justine Green was asking for, you know, existing employees wanting to protect their future career, possibly, and whether the government are going to do something. The other thing I heard was, could the government, you know, pay half the wages of the apprentice for the first year, you know, something like that to stimulate more demand. So that's, you know, whether that happens, I don't know, but they're the two things that I've heard.
It'll be interesting to see what happens, what the government provide to SMEs. If you look at that data that the ISE have shown, there's a massive impact on SMEs versus large, and that will be interesting to see what comes out in the wash.
Yeah, I think the government are concerned about the 16 to 18 year olds. Forget the COVID crisis, the numbers have been dropping anyway. So, you know, since the levy came in, there are less 16 to 18 year olds doing apprenticeships. Now, some of that is to do with there's more people just staying in full-time education because of the government policy that you've got to stay there until you're 18. But the government are concerned. So I think even pre this crisis, they were considering what else can we do to incentivise employers to give school leavers a career opportunity. So you know, this could be a bit of an opportunity for them to tackle that.
And that links to one of the points you made earlier on, Danny, about Brexit. You know, if you think about what's going on in a lot of organisations, they've got ageing workforce. You know, that's one of the we've still got study skills gaps. 30 years after, you know, first, you know, we've still got skills, and then you layer in future skills on top of that, and then you've got Brexit coming down the track. You know, so there's the potential for. I was on a webinar with the 5% Club last week, and with Chris from Network Rail, and he was talking about this perfect storm that is brewing, that could really hit us hard, you know, when we're just getting out of COVID, you know, and start to build back up again. Then aging workforce, load of people then retiring, all these skills gaps. You know, we've turned off or massively ramped down apprenticeships, and suddenly business is going, oh my God, I haven't got the people I need with the skills I need. I can't grow. I can't. So I do think that you know, to enable organisations, and I shared something on the ISE Apprentice WhatsApp group today, Stephen, about I think there's a job to be done, but sadly, to rebuild the business case for apprenticeships in a lot of organisations, and use that bigger data and that perfect storm piece to remind businesses about why apprentices are so important to the future of organisations, because no sooner you come out of this, you could be hit by this next perfect storm, and then there's a ton of pain. So, you know, frustrating that we've got to rebuild the business case, but that may be the case in some organisations.
It's the perfect time though, isn't it? With all the changes, it's the perfect time. You know, new skills coming in. A lot of organisations won't be ready for these new skills. Just fast track digitalisation, probably AI, lots of different things. You know, years ahead into 8 weeks. And so it's the ideal time to say this is why you should bring an apprentice. You've got a really good business case before you do anything else on those skill sets. So I would recommend, you know, we're going around now, you know, talking about it, and we've already got, I guess, the model, but it's growing that model, but absolutely recommend that highly enough.
And we are pretty much on the hour, so I'm going to come to you with one last question. I just wanted to say, I was going to say the same on SMEs, Danny. That's what our data shows. And I think the government might pump more money into SMEs, because talk to any economist, SMEs recruit at a faster rate than bigger employers. So I think as we come out of this, that's where there'll be more effort going to SMEs and apprentices. So, and anyway, we're almost on the hour. So what I want to do is very quickly go around to you all individually and ask you a couple of questions. We haven't really got talking about what was going to stick in sort of a year's time, 18 months time. So what I was going to ask was one thing you think that will stick as a result of this crisis and the way that we're all working differently, and also a quick top tip to anybody out there that's having to sort of manage the whole apprentice piece in their organisation. So who wants to go first?
I don't mind jumping in. I think I think what I'm most interested in is the role of the office. You know, what is the office going to look like in a year's time? You know, you've got the chief executive of Barclays saying he can't imagine 7,000 people being in his Canary Wharf building again. So what's going to happen to Canary Wharf? You know, so that I mean, I spend a lot of my time going around to clients, going to their offices and meeting them there. What's it going to look like? You know, and how it, and what percentage of the workforce are going to remain at home, which is then going to mean, I mean, for our perspective, we think that, you know, online training, home working, we think that's going to stay. I think there'll always be a blend. You absolutely need the human interaction, as we all see. Not seeing our families, it's pretty miserable, isn't it? You can see them on Zoom, but you really want to touch them. So I think there's always going to be that blend, but I think it's going to be much more towards the virtual.
Thanks, James. Who wants to go next?
Yeah, I'd reinforce. I think it's, you know, unsurprisingly, it's tech, you know, and a greater use of technology. Again, the ISE survey backs that up, doesn't it, Stephen? Was it 74% of employers are turning their induction and L&D online? You know, so, and I can't imagine that'll ever go back. It might rebalance the blend a little bit from where it is, but I just can't see it going back to where it was. So no big surprise, but digital. And then the big tip, I guess, I'm going to give 2 quick tips to your final point. One, in terms of thinking about it from a student perspective, there's a new website that's being launched called Next Step Support. Stephen, I know the ISE are involved in it, and we are at My Kind of Future, which is a website that's been brought together by a number of different organisations, just providing support to students. It's mostly university focused, but it's fundamentally about students and just helping them navigate and understand what is out there and what I can do. So that's something. And the other one is the ISE, I've touched on it already, but the ISE WhatsApp group for apprenticeships. If you're not part of it already, everyone that you can see on the screen here, apart from Stephen, who sort of is part of the apprentice steering group. We've had running for the last 2.5 years, but so there's a really great WhatsApp group that the ISE run around apprenticeships. If you're not on it already, get in touch with Stephen and he'll make sure you're on it, because people have done loads of sharing on it, sharing of experience, asking questions. People have been really helpful. So the ISE community is very, very strong on that WhatsApp group. So if you want help, quick questions, bigger stuff, use the group.
Cool. Thanks, Sam. Karen and Danny, any final comments from yourselves?
Yeah, I think for me, probably the future, I think, although we've kind of just touched on the business case, I do think the importance of that entry-level talent will be there in the future. I think with all these rapid changes, the businesses are going to have to quickly adopt, whether it's you know, external hires or reskilling or upskilling that we've kind of touched on today. I do think it's going to become more and more important, and there's going to definitely be more of a seat at the table, you know, with those conversations. I think it's a tip. I think it would be, you know, not to underestimate how much time it will take to kind of make these changes in COVID, but go for it. I mean, it is, I say, as I started off, it's been a slog, it's been hard work. Not going to lie, you know, don't underestimate that, but it's so rewarding when you can actually achieve that. You know, you're still able to bring those young people into the business that we're talking about that are struggling from an unemployment point of view, and it's so worth it to get it right, to keep that recruitment and that on-programme learning for those apprentices going.
I think from my perspective, I would really hope that the sense of community sticks. And I mean that in the sense of both physical community, supporting each other and helping each other, which is the nice fluffy stuff, but actually that sense of community in the principle of helping other people, so helping candidates, helping peers, helping other businesses as well. And I think my biggest tip would be collective learning. So work, you know, bounce ideas off peers, use your networks, work with your learning provider. You know, surely a learning provider who's moving to virtual will have ideas that you can learn from, and as a business, when you're onboarding people internally, you'll have ideas that they can learn from. So I think that collective learning is really, really critical as we all try and navigate what this actually means for the next kind of year or two.
Fantastic, that's great. Really good contribution from all of you. Thank you very much. We're giving you a big virtual round of applause. And I see 1 or 2 people are having to drop off, because I think we've just gone past the past our house, so probably going on to the next sort of Zoom meeting or call or webinar. But that was really useful insight. Thank you very much. As Simon mentioned, the WhatsApp group, if you want to be involved in the WhatsApp group, just ping me an email. If you're not a member and you want to be involved more, also ping me an email. My email's on the website, but it's very easy. It's Stephen with a PH at ise.org.uk. As I also said at the start, this webinar has been recorded. It will go online later on today, so please feel free to revisit, if you want to refresh some of the things we talked about, or share it with other people in your team and within your networks, because I think we've had some really good insights from our panel today. So really appreciate it. Thank you very much. It does take, you know, it's not just the hour here, it's the thought that goes into preparing what we're going to talk about. So we genuinely appreciate you taking the time and effort to do it. And keep your eye out for the next webinar. We're doing roughly 1 or 2 webinars a week across a whole range of subjects. So please do keep tuning in to the next ones that we do. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the day, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.